Welcome to my third episode of my Wonder Years podcast. Today I'm going to be just me, Spencer, recording an episode of The Wonder Years. So I just watched the third episode of the show called My Father's Office, and that aired on March 29th, 1988. So in this episode, Kevin wants to learn more about Jack Arnold and what he does at NORCOM. So there's no Winnie in this episode. There's very little Paul, and it's very one plot episode. So we start at the dinner table / the kitchen, and a gorilla show is playing. So the gorilla show was interesting to me because it highlights the plot and how Jack is a very angry man, and that the little gorilla cubs, or little gorilla children, often try to avoid the gorilla when he comes home to his gorilla home. I don't even know what would call that, but little gorilla home. So that really highlights the plot. And we see Jack first time coming home from work. Car often makes a loud noise. He walks in and he says a common phrase for him in this episode, which is "work is work." And we see the reaction of the kids and Norma is to stay away, because if he's angry, he'll go watch TV, watch whatever's on TV. But if he's really, really had a bad day, he'll go outside to his telescope. So we see that first case of him being angry, watching the TV, and again with the telescope when he's really angry. It's very simple plot, this episode, but I think it packs a punch. We really get to see why Jack has been so angry the last 2 episodes and this episode. So from there we go to the kitchen where Kevin's learning French. His mom's teaching them. They're both very happy. And then the mood changed as soon as Kevin's dad comes home from work and his bike's out there, which Kevin just assumed he was going to go ride it to Paul's, but Jack wasn't having it and he was mad. But Kevin, as the narrator said, had to show him lip, because sometimes you can't help but give your father back a little lip. And Kevin says lighten up to him, which he says it under his breath, which every kid does at that age. From there, Kevin is in his room and tears are rolling down his face. Now, I have to say one thing about these tears. They were huge and at the randomest spots all over his face. And I think they probably added that in. I don't think he cried that way. Something tells me that at that age, you couldn't cry just on cue like that, especially when it's not a really emotional scene. It's really just all of a sudden, it's just pouring down his face. So it's got to be fake tears that they added. So from there, we get a flashback to when times were easier. This scene I remember my last watch was very common for the show to use, which was Jack's on the beach. They're all on the beach. Jack, Karen, and Wayne are all on the beach with Norma and Jack. And Jack's picking up a young Kevin, and he's smiling and laughing. Which I wonder if, this being Kevin's perspective on life before, could it be possible that maybe Jack wasn't working at NORCOM at that point? Because it seems like NORCOM seems to be the root of all this anger and stress, which I think later on in the show, I can't remember, the later seasons are a little bit of fog to me, but I don't think he worked at NORCOM later on in the show. But I guess we'll have to see as the show goes on where he ends up. So from there we go to the bus, and this is before when Kevin was going to Paul's house. That was the mention of Paul, but this is really the only thing Paul has in this episode, is being there with Kevin. They're talking to this random guy. I can't remember if they gave him his name or not, but he's there with Wayne and Paul, and they're both talking about what their number one job they want to do is, and then their fallback. So they didn't say Wayne's and They say the friends though. So Kevin's main job he wants was the baseball player, and his fallback was the astronaut, which the friend of Wayne's, or I don't know if he's a friend or not, but the friend of Wayne says baseball, I think in basketball. And then Kevin and Wayne go, well, that's not a good fallback. That's not falling back enough. Well, Kevin's is baseball player and then astronaut. So I assume that astronaut would be harder than baseball player, but I guess at that age, they just assumed astronaut would be easier because baseball players seem like a tough job to get into. But I like the idea that these are younger kids and they're giving their best idea of what would be difficult to get into. So they move on to what the fathers do. So Kevin and mainly Wayne asks this: what does your father do for a job? And he of course doesn't know the friend. And then the friend turns it back on them and says, well, what does your father do? And from there they go, well, they know Jack works at NORCOM and he manages stuff. And the friend goes, well, what goes on in NORCOM? Is he the janitor? And of course that pisses them off, because the one thing in this show, even up to this point, is Kevin and Wayne, they'll defend Jack to the ends of the earth because that's their father. And up until they go to they say, oh, he manages at NORCOM, and still the guy's like, oh, I'm gonna still pick on you. You can't tell me you asked me what my dad does, and you really don't know anything about your dad. And that probably from there it gets Kevin thinking, well, really I don't know anything about what my dad does, and I probably should investigate. And of course Wayne, the opposite. Well, I don't see how it benefits me, so I don't think I have any more to investigate. And Kevin and Wayne and Paul, of course, they don't want to talk about this anymore because they don't know much about what Jack does. So they use their arms to make farting noises, and that really distracts everyone. So it benefited them to do that, actually, because they really didn't have any more information on what he does. We go to the kitchen where Karen and Norma are, I don't know if she has a dress on, and they're doing something with that dress. And Kevin tries to probe Norma on what Jack actually does. And of course Karen, the hippie, says that he's working for the military industrial complex in South Asia. So that we get a little bit of idea what he does, but really we know he's a manager. So does he manage the products or manage the people in the company? We never really get an idea of that. We know it's toasters and coffee makers that are the products coming out of NORCOM. We don't really know what exactly they do with those, because Karen says there's something in those products that use for military reasons, and of course no military involvement is okay with her. From there, everything kind of is positive, but then what happens again is Jack comes home, and he says his usual line where he repeats the phrase, last time he came home it was work is work, this time it was a day is a day. He goes to watch TV, which we know means he's mad, but not quite super mad. So he probably his boss probably got mad at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, but the rest of the day was okay, enough not to make it the telescope. So from the kitchen, we go into the TV room where he's watching a Senators game, and of course this is Jack's time to vent and not really vent, but he's time to fume out all those bad feelings and anger to start a new day. Because we learn later that Jack is often defending coworkers, and he needs this time to decompress to really build up his stamina for the next day. So Kevin, the way he asks some of these questions are very much a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old way of asking, which is to ask what he does all day. Not what does your job entail, but what does he do all day?